we move on to Dickon Howell, who's going to speak to us about delivering nature-positive operations offshore. Dickon's also part of the Howell Marine Consulting and INSITE team. Welcome, Dickon.
Thank you, Georgina. Thank you, Stephen, for a really good overview of where we currently are. I'm going to talk to you a bit about where we might be going. Over the last year and a half, in HMC, as well as doing INSITE and EcoWind and EcoFlow, we have a whole bit of our team who work with DEFRA and Natural England, mostly designing and understanding how you develop good policy and then deliver it on the ground. So it's like how Travis was saying, turning theory into practice. And we've been doing this quite a lot around nature-positive operations, marine net gain, and not just with DEFRA and Natural England, but also talking to operators, talking to the finance community, and understanding both how you can deliver this in a way that means that you can get good compliance, so that impact actually happens, but that you can fund it in the right way, and that things can endure. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm not going to talk about the work that we've done for DEFRA and Natural England in a lot of detail today. And the reason for that is that it's work we did for DEFRA and Natural England, and it's going to be published in about 2 or 3 weeks, I think, maybe a bit more. I'm looking at Chris, it's going to be a bit more in about a month. So I'm going to leave that to that, but what I am going to do is give some reflections on that work and work we've been doing for the private sector and various other kind of operations offshore, to give an overview of the principles of what we need to be thinking about when we're delivering nature positive offshore. And those principles are based around compliance and assurance at the end of the day. That's compliance both for regulators and assurance for those people who want to make sustainable investments in our offshore environment. Let me just go here. Okay, so our oceans are under unprecedented pressure, and we've talked a lot about that over the last couple of days, from many things: overfishing, pollution, coastal development, climate change, and marine biodiversity is in decline. Nature positive and marine net gain are two terms that are pretty much interchangeable. Marine net gain is what we call it in England, and they represent a paradigm shift. So we're no longer just trying to avoid damage, but we're looking to actively restore and improve the marine environment, as Stephen was talking about earlier. And these approaches are increasingly being embedded in global and national policy, and not just environmental policy, but financial policy as well. From the Global Biodiversity Framework to DEFRA's developing M&G strategy, and things like the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which sounds really dry, but if you haven't heard about it, you should go and look at it, because from a developer perspective, it's driving corporate environmental sustainability goals. The ambition is bold. It's a thriving, resilient ocean that supports both nature and people. But to get there, we need to embed nature recovery into how we plan, develop, and manage our marine activities. That means every offshore project, whether it's a wind farm, cable, a port, oil and gas rig, should leave nature in a better state than before. So these concepts have evolved. Net gain, nature positive, started in terrestrial planning, where development must demonstrably improve biodiversity. And in England, biodiversity net gain has a whole regulatory framework around it that you can go and have a look at in a lot of detail. But the marine environment is very different. It's vast, it's really interconnected, and often data poor. So marine net gain, or nature positive operations offshore, have adapted that terrestrial thinking so that we can think about mobile species, shifting baselines, broader ecosystem dynamics, and that complexity that you get offshore, to focus on system-level recovery, often more than site-level recovery. But both approaches share these core principles. And again, these principles have come not just from the work we've done for DEFRA, but work, like there's been work in the oil industry, from IPECA, from the Energy Institute, from lots of operators who've got their own frameworks, and I've pulled out of them some core principles. Mitigation hierarchy first. We must avoid, minimise, restore, then offset. We should only offset residual impacts. We should ensure additionality, measurability, and ecological equivalence. It's really, really important to avoid the greenwashing that Stephen was talking about earlier. We should engage stakeholders early and throughout and build for long-term governance and align with strategic priorities. And again, what Stephen was talking about, where we're looking at, if we have national, regional status assessments and we know what the targets are that we should be looking for, we should be going for them. And these principles ensure that when we're setting these schemes up, that they are credible, science-based and impactful. And to kind of put a bit of flesh on the bones, we've put forward like 5 phases that we need to think about so that we can be structured, repeatable, evidence-based, we can work across sectors and projects, and most importantly, that when we're looking at the compliance, I keep coming back to, I'm an ex-regulator, so I keep coming back to the compliance and insurance. It's really important because those are the things that are going to ensure impact in the end. So everything starts with robust baselines. We need to know what features are there, what habitats, species and functions are at stake, and that includes understanding ecological condition, connectivity and existing pressures. And using absolute baselines as our reference point, we talked about baselines yesterday, but targets must take into account those declining trends. I think what Kate was saying yesterday is we can't look backwards, we have to look forwards. We need to understand what we want our environment to be and what those targets and indicators should be and be moving collectively towards them. So this tries to avoid those shifting baseline syndrome and anchor our efforts in ecological integrity. I've talked about this before, but we need to apply the mitigation hierarchy, avoid impacts where possible through smart siting and design, minimise what can't be avoided with best practice operations, restore impacted habitats, and only as a last resort offset those residual effects. And then understanding that when we've reached no net loss, that's when we start thinking about net positive gain. And that's some of the new bit that we don't have in marine at the moment. Any measures we take must be feasible, evidence-based and strategically aligned. That could mean habitat restoration, measures to support species recovery or nature-inclusive design. Stephen went over them in a lot more detail. But the important thing here is that they need to be ecologically realistic, they need to be feasible, and they need to have that strategic value. So that's building those measures not just for what you can do, but for what is needed. And again, linking those individual actions to strategic restoration priorities. And I've just got some here. UKMS we've talked about. We did some work with Natural England with the second phase of their marine restoration potential, which is looking at species and what the potential is for restoration, but also broader marine planning or local recovery strategies. We need to make sure that we're aligning and integrating with those national and regional targets. And success depends on credible long-term monitoring, and that includes ecological indicators, species, habitats, connectivity, but also pressure and response metrics. And these metrics are really, really important to avoid greenwashing and ensuring impact. And that independent verification is critical to build trust and enable adaptive management so we can learn and improve as we go. No one actor can deliver this alone. Government must lead on policy and regulation. Developers must incorporate biodiversity into their design and delivery. NGOs and academics provide implementation capacity and evidence and that critical research and innovation. And local communities must help set priorities and benefit from nature recovery. And it's about collaboration, transparency and shared ownership. We also need the right infrastructure, I guess, and I don't mean infrastructure as the physical infrastructure, but the assessment infrastructure and regulatory infrastructure to go with it. So this is nested frameworks to understand losses and gains at feature, ecosystem and natural capital levels. And the work we did with DEFRA is looking at how do we measure loss and gain at those different levels, and how realistic is it that actually the evidence that we're using to understand whether we're creating impact is certain enough to be used either in a regulatory framework or in a financial assurance framework, and both those things are really important. Understanding not just at local scale, but at seascape scale, where are we going to prioritise where interventions will work best? and sustainable finance mechanisms, from blue bonds to pooled investment funds, to unlock delivery at scale. This is a part of the end here that as an environment community and a government community we don't think about enough. And personally, I think in the last 6 to 12 months, my eyes have really been opened to this bit on the end here that we need to think about much more. So just to close, here are some key recommendations. Use structured frameworks for assessment, align with strategic plans and restoration goals, pilot market-based financing, ensure strategic alignment with things like good environmental status, build monitoring metrics and verification into everything, invest in capacity, data and trust. If we can do this, I think actually over the next 5 to 10 years, and even in the next 12 to 18 months, we can start to see marine net gain and nature positive become a reality, not just a policy aspiration. And the last thing I'm going to do is give a plug for some work that will be released soon. So DEFRA's marine net gain assessment framework. There's a piece of work looking at delivery mechanisms for marine net gain in England, and Maripo Plus, which is looking at marine restoration potential for species. I'm sorry, Georgina, she's going to kick me off now. Are going to be coming out in the next month, so keep an eye out for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dickon.